afternoon. I'm joined by Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald and the Speaker of the State Assembly, Jeff Fitzgerald. These are both with us here. They'll be making some comments as well. It would be nice today if we could announce that we had an agreement for these 14 state senators to come back. But instead, we've got a letter from Senate Democratic Leader Mark Miller, a letter that says, in part, I would ask that you or your authorized representatives agree to meet with us near the Wisconsin-Illinois border. Now, it's interesting, it's addressed to myself and Senator Fitzgerald. We're both going to touch on this, but we need to walk through why this letter is so ridiculous. And I think it's important because for the last several weeks, both Senator Fitzgerald and my administration have been reaching out to reasonable senators, many of whom are very interested and willing to come back to the state of Wisconsin. And time again, the person standing in the way of making that possible is Senator Mark Miller. Senator Fitzgerald is going to talk about how a week ago he went to Kenosha to meet with several senators who are interested in coming back. He can fill you in on his discussions there. That was one of the many times in the past couple of weeks in which, instead of holding press conferences and negotiating or appearing to negotiate in the public, what Senator Miller and others have done, we've actually been trying to get the job done and have been reaching out to those senators who are interested in joining us back here in the state's capital to conduct the business of the people of the state. After that meeting, later in the week, we thought, okay, let's raise the stakes. So on Wednesday, I authorized members of my administration to travel to Kenosha to meet again with some of those same state senators who are interested in coming back, who have a sincere interest in coming back, and who are reasonable about their approach in terms of coming back. And that night, they invited, and he accepted, they invited Senator Miller in hopes that after day after day after day of thinking they were close to coming back, only to find Senator Miller standing in the way of that progress, having him there might be helpful. So they met at the McDonald's in Kenosha. In fact, Senator Miller actually had some hot cocoa along the way with some of the other folks there. They had a good and lengthy decision, one of which created a framework for what we all thought was going to be a pathway home. In fact, my staff was so optimistic about that, they literally called me at about midnight, woke me up on Wednesday night to talk through exactly what had been discussed at that meeting and to tell me they were optimistic that we were on our way towards coming home Thursday or Friday with those state senators. So we had progress. We thought we had the framework of a pathway home for those 14 Senate Democrats. But again, Senator Miller stood in the way. And Senator Fitzgerald, I know, has got some comments on that as well, but it really leads you to the question of who's in charge. When you literally have a meeting where reasonable senators feel like they got an agreement with our administration, one in which we kept both the Senate and the Assembly Republican leadership in the loop on in terms of what we were doing and the progress we were making, just as Senator Fitzgerald had earlier in the week, kept the three of us informed as to what was going on. Each and every step, it appears as though anytime there's some reasonable senators seeking to make and take action, again, the barrier tends to be Senator Miller. Even as late as this weekend, yesterday, I authorized two members of my administration to travel to South Beloit to go across the state line to do exactly what Senator Miller is asking for this letter to be done in the future. We did yesterday. We actually did this. Again, we didn't put out a press release because we're serious about getting this done on behalf of the people of the state. People talk about negotiate. We've been doing it for days. The problem is we have a handful of senators who are interested in doing this, but we have Senator Miller who time and time again allows his caucus to stand in the way of progress coming forward. And now I think the public has finally seen in the past 24 hours firsthand the frustration that we have felt for days, in the sense that they were misled by the statements that Senator Miller made last night to a national media outlet when he said that the Senate was going to come back, and now today is reversing course on that. I think that's indicative of the fact that now Senator Miller is misleading the public, just like he misled us, and just like apparently he seems to be misleading many members of his own caucus. For us to move forward, we need to have reasonable and responsible elected officials stand up and decide it is time to set aside those who would stand in the way and instead figure out a reasonable pathway home, a pathway we've offered multiple times in the last couple of weeks and we're willing to continue to offer. I've been had a discussion personally with one of those reasonable senators I called this morning myself on the way back from the tourism conference I spoke at earlier today. We have a path. We have a way home for at least some of those state senators so we can get a vote on this measure, and more importantly, we can move this state forward to get back to jobs, the economy, and our goal of creating 250,000 jobs in the next 4 years here in the state of Wisconsin. That's where we can work together on. That's where we've had success. We're working with many of these same Senate Democrats who've joined Republicans here in the legislature to set a clear agenda that shows that we can get Wisconsin working again. But we've got to have leaders who are willing to stand up and stand in the way of those who are trying to block this from happening. And that's why this letter is just absolutely ridiculous, because time and time again we have met the very person who wrote this letter to myself and Senator Fitzgerald. Mark Miller is the person standing in the way of that progress, and we need to have a change so that we can move this state forward. Before we take some questions, I'm going to ask Senator Fitzgerald and then Speaker Fitzgerald to say a few words as well.
Senator
go ahead. We'll take questions in a moment after we each talk.
I've been in the building 16 years as a legislator, and I've been involved in many, many negotiations over the years. But I must say that one of the things you certainly have to establish before you negotiate is make sure you're negotiating with somebody that can actually deliver. And I think that's part of the frustration right now. When I drove to Kenosha and met with Senator Cullen and Senator Jow, we actually started on the budget repair bill. And we discussed each item there. Some of them just working through what did this mean, how does it work, how would it work. And Senator Cullen took out his yellow legal pad and started to take notes. At the end of that 2-hour meeting, I asked them to forward those ideas to Director Lang at the Fiscal Bureau, and they did that. And there was a list of items that was created that evening that I reviewed the next day. It was then at that point that I brought the governor's office in on that list and quickly figured out that I needed to continue to talk to them. At no time did Senator Miller become part of those discussions. But what I really thought what I was doing was negotiating with those two senators to come back on their own. And they actually said, we will come back on our own, we'll bring a couple others with us. We think the magic number is about 5. That would be a safe number of senators that could return to the chamber, and then we'd have the quorum and we could move forward. By Tuesday, a promise was given to me that that in fact was going to happen. And then on Wednesday morning, they didn't show up. So it became apparent to me that I needed to get the governor involved, and at that point we handed things off to the governor, in which he had his guys down there working with them all week. We have been negotiating just as late as yesterday. We were with the governor once again going over this list, continuing to figure out could we strike a balance so that our caucuses would still be supportive and be able to reach out to these Democrats and get them back. The problem is that Senator Miller is not in charge of the caucus. Senator Erpenbach is obviously doing media out of Chicago. You've got Senator Larson and Senator Taylor that are in Chicago kind of taking the role of the bomb throwers. You certainly have Cullen and Jow that are negotiating, trying to get back, can't figure a way out of the box. And then you have Senator Miller, who's got his own plan apparently, and based on the letter that the governor and I received just this morning, either clueless to what's going on in the rest of his caucus, or really is beholden to labor, who won't let him move in one direction or another. So it's the most frustrating process I've ever been involved in, because you really don't know who to talk to. You really don't know who can deliver, and at the end of the day, the only way to negotiate is to be able to lay out a list of items that are on the table, and we can't even get that far. So I'm frustrated by it. I think that, the time for them to be out of state and for, the institution to be kind of torn apart the way it is, that time has come and gone. And it's just, I want to make sure that people understand that, the Republicans have been willing to sit down and talk about these things and try and iron something out. I also want to be clear, this is beyond the budget repair bill. I mean, that is something that I've been saying since the beginning, that we're not flexible on that piece. But what I offered to these senators that first day when I met with them, I said, listen, we can do a motion in the Finance Committee that can address these items later on. And they agreed. They shook their head. Yeah, that's a good idea, Fitz. That's what we should do.